Welcome, everybody. My name is Jeff Hunt. I'm Director of Strategy and Partnerships for Connecting Genetics to Climate. And for those of you who haven't joined us before, just a little bit of background. There's four of us on the team, my teammates Morgan and Leonore, who will be working in the background and also facilitating the breakout rooms that we're going to have later. And then our fourth team member is Dr. Ting Wu, who is at the Harvard Medical School in the Department of Genetics, and she's the one who started this program about 2 years ago. And what we're doing with this program overall is really trying to facilitate dialogue around genetic technologies, biotechnology, synthetic biology, whatever catchphrase you want to use, that is aimed at providing solutions to climate change, either in the adaptation or the mitigation space. This webinar is part of a series that we're running every other month where we're exploring different topics in the space of climate biotech. And so I'm just going to give a little bit of introduction, and then we are going to go into some examples. And as I mentioned before, we're going to have some breakout rooms. So the goal for this session today is to really hear from all of you, because this is for us to learn as a community, and also for us on the Connecting Genetics to Climate teams to sort of learn where the community is and see what it is that we can bring to this space. And then if you want to use the chat to go ahead and introduce yourselves. Morgan, the first thing we're going to pull up is the poll. We just want to get a sense of who's here and sort of what space you're coming from. So if folks can respond to this when we have the poll launched. So as you can see, we have a good chunk of you all are in the research space, but we also have people who are in comms and funding, public engagement. So that's really interesting because we're really interested to hear from sort of all sides, especially when we're dealing with this issue of engagement. So I'm just going to share my screen and we're going to get into it. All right. So our theme for today is on climate biotech engagement strategies. And the first thing I want to talk about is sort of what does that actually mean? So when we say engagement, what are we trying to mean with that word? And really the biggest thing that we're talking about, as we sort of mentioned in our program mission, is trying to facilitate conversations around these technologies. And engagement is a very broad term that's used in sort of the fields of science communication, public engagement. And what we're looking for here really is not just sort of the typical deficit model of talking down to people about science, but really having conversations of listening and having a sort of a back and forth, not only on sort of ideas, but actually seeing how those ideas can affect the implementation of technology. And so I'm just going to go through a couple of sort of main pillars of effective engagement best practices. And I want you to keep these in mind because we're going to have some folks share out some examples of their own work, and then we're going to hope that everybody in the breakouts is able to share either their experience with engagement or what they hope for in terms of engagement. And Neil, sorry, you didn't know you were going to be featured in this picture, but it's a good picture. So just a couple of things for us to consider when we're talking about engaging around climate biotechnology. The first is sort of what information is being presented, and that is obviously sort of the content. So we have to decide when we are going to engage, either from the perspective of a researcher or a perspective of a communicator or a funder, sort of what is the content that we are going to include when we are participating in the engagement. And that leads us to the second component, which is sort of the why is this information being presented? A lot of times we leave out this idea of strategy, of sort of thinking through sort of what the purpose is, what the goal is of what we're trying to achieve when we are trying to engage with different audiences. And oftentimes it's just a data dump or it's just complaining. And so having a strategy beforehand is really useful in terms of being effective with our engagement. A third component is who is presenting the information. And this is this idea of a messenger. And it's hard, but not all messengers are appropriate for all situations. And sometimes it's hard to sort of take a step back and say, hey, maybe I'm not the best person to be delivering this message. Maybe there's somebody else who's more appropriate who I can find. And so thinking about sort of who is the best person to be involved in the engagement. There's also an issue of sort of how information is being presented, and that's this concept of sort of the venue or the platform. Are you doing it online? Are you doing it in person? If you're doing it in person, sort of what kind of setting are you in? Are you in an academic formal setting? Are you in an informal setting? Are you going and meeting at a community space? So thinking about sort of what we're trying to achieve, how can the setting actually help us accomplish that goal? And then finally, how is the information being received by the different audiences and those who are involved in this engagement? So, what is the approach? Are we just giving a formal lecture? Are we engaged in dialogue? Are we trying to sort of just sit back and listen? There are a lot of different ways that we can approach doing our engagements. And so, thinking about that will really help us to have effective engagement. So those are just some main pillars that I wanted to go over. And what we're going to do now is get into some examples. And we have invited a couple folks who have some great work that they've done. And they are going to get 3 minutes. And I'm going to time this so because we're running, we don't have a ton of time to really just talk about sort of what their project is, what the goals were, what happened, and what did they achieve. So I think Lourdes, you are first up. So if you want to take the mic.
Hi everyone. I am Lourdes Mateos. I am from Mexico, and also I am with my partner, a colleague. His name is Luis Daniel Ortega. I think he left the room, but well, we're working in a community in Mexico named San Lorenzo Almecatla, and we are trying a group of 15 women who are farmers adopt technologies, biotechnologies. In special, we are trying that they adopt biofertilizers and bioinoculants. And what we are trying to do as a science communication strategy, we have worked during 2 years. And the first thing that we have achieved is to have a um, confidence and also to develop strategic messages in relation with the scientists, with the biotechnologists, in order to make women understand technology, but not just that. They must believe in the scientists, and also they must develop trust in the scientists, is something that we have learned in order to make them adopt technologies. When we're trying to do this kind of process, the science communication process is a long process. Sometimes we believe that we can achieve results really easily or really soon. However, it takes time, because when you are working with communities that maybe they are not so engaged with science, you need to get involved with them. And this is the thing that we are trying to do. Nowadays, we have worked with three kind of technologies, microgreens, and also we are trying to develop a citizen science project. We are trying to make them to go further and to create their own technologies. And this is what we are doing now. I don't know if the time is correct.
That was great. You came in under time. Well done.
So I
So
have more time. Okay.
yeah, you've got
So
another minute if you have anything else you want to add.
oh, sure. Okay. I try to be really fast. Well, something that we have learned from this process is sometimes meaning is something really important for women, because when they are trying to adopt technology, is because they want to enhance the nutrition and health of their families. And this is why they are interested in knowing new technologies, because most of them, they have children. And something that they have noticed is that nowadays vegetables and other kind of fruits, for example, are really polluted, or they have chemicals. And this community is very special because they are really aware of those chemicals in vegetables. And for us, it has been really pleasant and terrific, because when you are working with a community that is really willing to learn, the process is very maybe it's a long process, but it helps us to have a better understanding among the scientists and the community. I don't
And
know.
so just one question to follow up before we sort of switch over to breakouts. If you can give us a sense of sort of how this project has in any way affected the actual scientific research that's being done.
All right. No, we haven't impacted in scientific research because I think what we are trying now is, for example, to work with the scientists in order that they understand how they can approach to the community. Sometimes, for example, in my university, biotechnologists, they are not used to go with the community and talk to them and develop a dialogue. So we are maybe in the first stages of this science communication project. And maybe the next step would be that to affect or to impact in research.
Okay, cool. Well, thanks for sharing. That's a really interesting project, and it'll be, like you said, it's sort of in early stages. So to see how it plays out will be really fun to watch. Um,
Exactly. Yes, because in Mexico it's not so common to do that. So especially to work with, I don't know, with scientists. In fact, I'm not biotechnologist or scientist. I am from the communication discipline. And then we are working in an interdiscipline project. And it has been also a new learning for biotechnologists and for me, because when two disciplines are working together and they are not really related, also it's another kind of learning that as researcher you are developing. So maybe here in our country, these kind of projects are not so common, but we are trying to do that in order that we can generate more knowledge about the science communication process.
Great. Awesome. Well, thanks for being our volunteer and willing to share. So hopefully that has inspired everyone else. We are going to go into breakout rooms for about 30 minutes now. And the idea is going to be similar. Share out any experience that you have with an engagement project, either with your own work or one that you've been aware of. And then also sort of thinking about if you haven't been or just thinking collectively, how can we do better? How can we make improvements as a community in terms of engaging around these biotechnologies, either from the research perspective or sort of from the community perspective? So Morgan is going to assign everybody into a breakout room. We're going to take about 30 minutes there, and hopefully everyone's willing to share, and then we'll meet back here and sort of share out what we've learned. And I don't know if you put it in the chat, Morgan, but we can put it in again. We're going to have a shared document where everybody can just sort of add their ideas because we know not everybody's comfortable necessarily being on camera or speaking up. So this document will be a place to collect all of that information, just sort of in a digital format. So once you get your breakout room, feel free to jump in there and we'll get started in a couple minutes with those discussions. All right. And I'm going to throw it to Leonor. So, Leonor, just, yeah, share out what came from your
So
room.
we wish we had more time. It's kind of hard to when everyone's coming, which is one of the things that is part of, I think, is that we're all coming at this from different perspective. We have worked in different projects in different countries. It's kind of hard to kind of get that in such a short amount of time. But some of the things we've heard is about how, a new scientific development and breakthrough wouldn't have happened if it wasn't for a social meeting between two researchers in two different fields, right? So the importance of like when we're thinking about what kind of research problems to tackle, the importance of really talking to people across the different fields. We also heard about how actually by engaging, for example, with policymakers, not only did it have an impact with policymakers, but it also impacted what kind of research people were working on because they heard of new problems. We also heard about some questions around, like things like startup companies. Should we be communicating? Should we be doing engagement? What kind of like, what are kind of like, what should we be doing in the space? So questions around that. And then some examples of where things kind of went wrong, where actually things were deployed or something but then the effort wasn't recognized, or it wasn't what the community wanted. The kind of the three takeaways I was kind of coming up with when we really need some active listening if this is going to be engagement, and the importance of that to ensure that, and it is listening to community, listening to policymakers, listening to other researchers, but being open, I guess, to having input from across different fields. And how does that affect the work we do? Then something about, I guess, is maximizing our efforts for impact, right? Or pulling in the right direction. That if we spend a lot of effort in one area, pushing in one direction, and then actually we haven't taken into account what people actually want, that effort might go to waste. And finally, it's more of a question, and I think it's something for us folks here at Connecting Genetics and Climate for us to consider as well. How can we support some of this? But how do we learn from others in other fields? Because there are all these great examples out there. And it is hard when we're talking about people working in synthetic biology, people working in, planting trees in communities in Ecuador, we heard about people working with, students in Boston. There's all these, a community in Texas that needs to figure out how to like engage others in talking about climate change. How do we learn about these best practices? How do we share them out so that others can also benefit from what we're learning?
Great. Morgan, did you have a breakout room? Nope. You sent them all to us. Okay. So I'll just give a brief summary from our room. But if there's anything that Leonore said that anybody wants to follow up on, please
Yeah,
just
and
raise
I
your
did tell
hand.
we were all being pulled out, but I did say, because we were just kind of going through it, what I was going to say. But if anyone wants to add something, please feel free to jump in now.
Raise your hand or throw it in the chat. So I think it's interesting because our room touched on some of those, but we actually had some different issues that we discussed. I think one was sort of the balancing of sort of the how do you talk about these issues in a way that's real, in a way that's accessible, in a way that presents the gravity of the situation without removing all hope from the discussion, and sort of how do we provide the motivation for people to act? So what is it going to take for people to do things? And when we say people and we say act, we're not necessarily just talking about necessarily community organizing or somebody coming up with a research project. It's all of those things in concert and sort of what can we do for a collective effort. And I think, Kat brought up some good points about how we speak to different audiences is going to be different depending on the room that we're in. What words do we use? What motivators do we use? And how do we keep those things consistent for ourselves while also really being relevant to the different spaces that we're trying to reach? And I think that's something that's beyond climate biotech. It's beyond climate change. It's just general communication strategy. And I think, especially when we're coming from a scientific perspective, too often we think it's a one size fits all. And that's really been shown not to be the case. And I think it was interesting. We had several folks in our room who are coming from sort of the industry perspective, and their motivation is a lot about sort of problem solving, price points. What is it going to take to get a consumer to buy into a product? And is that enough for you as a researcher to invest your time, to convince investors to invest their money in getting your product to market to be something that people use? And I think, a lot of times when we talk about these issues, we come at it from sort of the academic, oh, research is great and we're just doing it for the sake of doing research and we see where it goes. And that's all well and good. But I would say, especially in the current climate, there has to be a utilization factor that is baked in to what work we're doing. And so I think that's something that we hit on a lot. And a lot of this just comes down to money, unfortunately. And I think that may be crass, but it's also the reality of the situation. So I think that's something that sort of factored in to for our discussions as well. There's sort of the theoretical side of sort of the research base, but also sort of the reality side of implementation, development and implementation. So anybody is welcome to follow up on what I said, or if people want to respond to anything that Leonore and I shared. We've got about 10 more minutes, so the floor is open, and we're just looking to have sort of more open discussion here.
I can add something on the early on. You brought up the topic of messengers and who is conveying the information. I have a friend at the Harvard Chan Center for Health Communication who's done a lot of work on spreading mental health research by partnering with creators and influencers. So different topic, but I think what sounds like what they have found is that it's been really key to have people other than scientists and government officials in that doing that kind of communications and outreach work. And so I wonder, I don't have answers to this, but like where could the organizations who are doing this work look for partners who can help to convey this message, to kind of remove some of that since there's so much like institutional distrust right now, like where could we look for partners who can get this message across who aren't seen as part of the institution themselves?
And there is quite a bit of research on this kind of work from the folks that do kind of communications research. I was trying to find it, but I haven't been able to find it. There was a really interesting article many years ago in New Scientist about who are the trusted sources on climate change. And at the time, like looking at different audiences. And for example, the military was one of the most trusted for people to kind of on the more right side of the spectrum, right? So I think it's finding out who do people trust and who are people already in these communities that I think is really, there is a lot of work there. So I think it's trying to match the problem in the community with like who's already part of the community and who do they trust, right? So and I think it will be different for different issues. But I think on this particular, on the issue of messenger, there is quite a little bit of research and for climate change.
Anyone else have anything they want to share? It's funny how like you have the breakout groups and everybody's rolling, and then you get back in the main session, everybody's just like, meh, momentum died.
I see
Well,
Jane
I
unmuted.
yeah,
Oh yeah.
I thank you. I think I mean for us, I'm with Pivot Bio, and we don't talk about climate change with our customers, right? We've really started first and foremost with our farmers, right? And celebrating the work that they do and bringing them a better solution that meets their needs. So kind of some of what we talked about in our breakout about, really identifying what's that need that you're addressing. And if the only reason to do this thing is climate, then I think, a lot of these solutions aren't going to make it out of the lab, right? And so finding that intersection, and I think this also, Jeff, at the end of our breakout, you were alluding to like the trust issue, right? Where we need to move quickly, but we need to build trust. I think when we align those, that kind of we find those solutions that work for in our case, the customer is the farmer. It works for the farmer for their own reasons, right? Because this is a better product for reasons that stands on its own, completely separate from climate. And for some of them, maybe the environmental benefits are meaningful. But that's not the first and foremost reason. And so we can build trust by having a better product. And the fact that it's having this benefit for climate is something that society can benefit from, but isn't necessarily going to get in the way of product adoption. And also, isn't the only reason for product adoption, right? And I think that can be one of the ways that we can move forward on trust more quickly. When we find those solutions that really hit those check marks.
Looks like Jeff might be frozen, so I'm going to just jump in. and say that thank you all. I wish I had been in a breakout. I'm going to hear more from our team and also all of the resources that have been shared out in the shared doc. That doc will remain open, so feel free to continue to contribute there. But also, we'll be coalescing everything we've heard from all of you, everything that came in from your registration forms, and posting that in the What We're Learning section of our website. And we'll email you all when we have those materials ready. So that hopefully the conversation can continue. We did have a really quick one question. Do you want this conversation to continue? So saying, along the lines of what Leonore mentioned, right? Hard to do this in such a short amount of time. So for anyone interested, they know now they want another conversation in the relatively near future. We won't commit to a date quite yet. Please let us know. And we can follow up about
We're
that.
exploring different formats, but for example, one of the things we would love if you are considering an engagement project, for example, and you are wondering where to start, who to partner with, who to engage, and you are open to workshop it with some of us in this kind of forum, and we're happy to keep it basically private and not recorded, etc. We would love to be part of those kind of initiatives and endeavors. We want to try be a resource for people in this space in whatever way we can. So with that said, we would ask you, following up, you will receive an email from us with resources and other materials. But if you do have something you would like to workshop, an idea that you want to kind of go into depth with, please respond to that email with some of your ideas exactly of what you would like to engage with us on. And we can then figure out something and maybe have others input as well.
A very strong response on a next conversation. So stay tuned. We'll be in touch.
Yeah.
Thank you all so much.
Thank you for being willing to share your experiences.